The morning of April Fool's Day in our cramped Los Angeles apartment, I decided it was now or never. As I stood there facing Malachi across the kitchen counter, my heart pounding, I blurted out the words I'd been holding for months. "Malachi, I'm in love with you." I expected him to laugh it off as a prank, to roll his eyes and tell me to stop messing around like any straight guy would. But instead he froze. His coffee mug slipped from his hand and crashed to the floor, dark liquid spreading across the tiles, and his eyes locked on mine with a mix of shock and something raw that made my blood run cold. I stood frozen too, the silence stretching between us like an endless chasm in the bright California sunlight filtering through the blinds. Malachi, my roommate of 2 years, the guy I'd shared late-night study sessions with, bad takeout, and endless talks about everything from basketball to politics, didn't move for what felt like forever. Then slowly tears welled up in his dark brown eyes. "Xavier," he whispered, his voice cracking in a way I'd never heard before. "You have no idea how long I've been waiting to hear that." Before I could process what was happening, he crossed the small space between us and pulled me into his arms. His lips met mine in a kiss that was gentle yet carried the weight of years of unspoken longing. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't April Fool's. It was real, and in that single moment everything I thought I knew about us shifted forever. We spent the rest of the morning cleaning up the spilled coffee in silence at first, then talking nonstop on the worn couch in our living room. Malachi told me how he'd been fighting his feelings since the day we met at freshman orientation back at USC. Growing up in a small town in Texas with a conservative family that went to church every Sunday had forced him to date girls in high school just to blend in, but nothing ever felt right. The identity crisis had eaten at him for years, the constant fear of disappointing his parents or losing the few friends who knew him as the quiet, reliable guy. I shared my own story, how even in more open California I'd spent high school denying who I was, scared of the whispers in the locker room, and the way my own father changed the subject whenever anything remotely personal came up. The confession had been my desperate test, a way to finally say it out loud even if it blew up our friendship. But his reaction left me reeling with a mix of hope and pure terror. By afternoon, we both agreed to keep it secret for now. The world didn't need to know. Our friends on campus, my part-time job at the coffee shop downtown, his family back home, none of it mattered in this bubble we'd suddenly created. We ordered pizza that evening and watched an old movie, but the air between us hummed with new electricity. His hand found mine on the couch cushion, fingers intertwining naturally as if they'd always belonged there. For the first time in my life, I felt completely seen, not just as the funny roommate or the reliable study partner, but as someone worthy of love exactly as I was. Yet deep down a quiet voice whispered that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Society still threw sideways glances at guys like us, and family pressures loomed like storm clouds on the horizon. Still, as the sun set over the LA skyline outside our window, it felt like the beginning of something beautiful and terrifying all at once. The next few days blurred together in stolen glances and quiet conversations when the apartment door was locked. Malachi opened up more than I'd ever seen, talking about the nights he'd lain awake wondering if he'd ever find someone who understood the weight he carried. I told him about the time in high school when a rumor almost cost me my spot on the soccer team, how I'd learned to smile through the fear. We laughed about the little things too, like how he always stole my hoodies and how I pretended not to notice. The emotional release after years of hiding felt like breathing fresh air for the first time. But even in those early moments of joy, small cracks appeared. What if someone noticed the way we looked at each other a second too long? What if keeping this secret started to feel like another kind of cage? Those thoughts lingered as we fell asleep in our separate beds that night, the promise of tomorrow hanging between us like a fragile thread. The following weeks unfolded like a dream I was afraid to wake from. Mornings started with Malachi making coffee just the way I liked it, black with a hint of cinnamon, and we'd steal kisses in the kitchen before classes. Afternoons we studied together at the campus library, our feet touching under the table in silent connection. Evenings brought long walks along the Venice boardwalk where the ocean breeze carried away some of our fears. Malachi's laugh sounded lighter now, and I caught myself smiling at nothing just because he was near. Our conversations went deeper than ever, peeling back layers of the identity struggles we'd both buried for so long. He described the guilt he'd felt every Sunday in church back home, praying silently for something he thought was wrong. I shared how coming out to my mom last year had been freeing but left me wondering if my dad would ever accept the truth. These talks bonded us tighter than any friendship ever had, turning roommates into something far more profound. Yet small conflicts began to test us. Our mutual friend Jake started noticing things, asking why we suddenly spent every weekend together instead of joining the usual group for basketball. "You two are attached at the hip lately," he joked one night over burgers, but the teasing edge in his voice made my stomach twist. Malachi brushed it off with his usual easy smile, but later that night in the apartment he paced the living room, running a hand through his dark hair. "What if he figures it out? My parents are coming for a visit next month. Xavier. They still think I'm the same kid who dated that girl from youth group." The fear in his eyes mirrored my own internal doubts. I pulled him close, reminding him we could handle it together, but the conversation left a lingering tension. For the first time, the secret felt heavy, like a weight pressing on my chest every time we had to act normal around others. Still, the joy outweighed the worry most days. We drove up the coast one weekend to Malibu, parking on a quiet overlook where the Pacific stretched endlessly. Sitting on the hood of my old Honda, Malachi rested his head on my shoulder and talked about wanting to build a life where he didn't have to hide anymore. I kissed his temple and promised we'd get there, even if it took time. Those moments of quiet understanding made the risks feel worth it. Back at the apartment, we cooked simple dinners together, laughing when sauce splattered everywhere, and fell into comfortable silences that spoke volumes. The emotional growth was real. I could feel myself becoming braver, more honest with myself about what I deserved. Malachi seemed lighter too, his Texas drawl softening when he let his guard down completely. But as the days passed, I sensed the first cracks forming in our bubble. A text from his mom about the upcoming visit reminded us both that outside forces were closing in, and the misunderstanding with Jake was just the beginning of bigger storms. We went to bed that night holding hands across the narrow space between our beds, clinging to the happiness we'd found while wondering how long it could last before the world demanded answers. Malachi's parents arrived the first weekend in May, turning our apartment into a battlefield of careful performances. His dad, a tall man with a firm handshake and stories about oil fields back in Texas, clapped me on the back like I was just the helpful roommate. His mom hugged us both and insisted on cooking a big Southern meal in our tiny kitchen. I played the part perfectly, laughing at their jokes and helping set the table, but inside my stomach churned every time Malachi avoided my eyes across the room. The pressure mounted during dinner when his mom asked about dating life. Malachi froze for a split second before mumbling something about being too busy with classes. I saw the flicker of pain in his expression, the same identity crisis he'd confessed to me weeks earlier now staring back at him in his parents' expectations. That night after they left for their hotel, the fight erupted. "I can't keep doing this," Malachi said, voice low but shaking as he paced our living room. "Pretending in front of them feels like lying to myself all over again." I tried to reason with him, reminding him we agreed to take it slow, but my own frustration boiled over. "You think this is easy for me? Watching you smile like nothing's changed while I sit here like a stranger in my own home." The argument escalated, words flying about family loyalty versus personal truth, until we both stood there breathing hard. It was our first real fight, born from the cultural clash between his conservative upbringing and the life we were trying to build. Tears stung my eyes as I realized how deeply the societal expectations still gripped him. We didn't speak for hours, each retreating to our separate corners of the apartment, the silence heavier than any kiss had ever been light. The next morning brought tentative peace. Malachi apologized over coffee, admitting the visit had stirred up old fears about disappointing the people who raised him. I pulled him into a hug, feeling the tension ease as we talked through it honestly. We spent the day showing his parents around campus, playing the platonic friends perfectly, but every shared glance between us carried new weight. By the time they drove away Sunday evening, something had shifted in Malachi. He sat on the couch after they left and said quietly, "I don't want to hide forever, Xavier, but I'm scared of what telling them might cost." I sat beside him, our shoulders touching, and promised we'd face it together when he was ready. The experience deepened our bond even as it exposed the fractures. The emotional journey was no longer just about falling in love. It was about learning to stand tall in who we were despite the pressures trying to push us back down. Small victories followed, like holding hands openly when no one was around. But the family visit left a scar that reminded us growth often came with pain. As weeks passed, I watched Malachi wrestle with his choices, and I wrestled with my own need to push him toward freedom without losing him in the process. The betrayal came without warning on a Tuesday afternoon. Jake cornered me outside the library after class, his usual joking tone gone. "Dude, I saw you and Malachi kissing in the parking lot last week. What's going on?" My heart dropped. Before I could respond, he added, "I didn't mean to tell anyone, but word's spreading on the group chat. People are asking questions." By evening, the whispers had reached campus clubs, and Malachi's phone buzzed nonstop with texts from old high school friends back home. Someone had posted a vague comment online that didn't name us but left little doubt. Malachi's face went pale when he read it, the societal backlash hitting like a physical blow. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," he muttered, sinking onto the couch as tears threatened again. The fallout tested everything. A few classmates started avoiding us in group projects, and one professor made an offhand comment in lecture about modern lifestyles that felt aimed directly at us. Malachi withdrew, spending hours staring at his phone as messages from his Texas relatives trickled in with questions he wasn't ready to answer. I tried to be his rock, cooking his favorite meals and reminding him we hadn't done anything wrong. But my own internal doubt peaked. Was our love worth this isolation? Nights became tense, filled with quiet arguments about whether we should have been more careful. The misunderstanding with Jake, who swore he meant no harm, only made things worse when he tried to apologize but ended up outing more details in his clumsy explanations. Betrayal from someone we trusted cut deepest, forcing us to confront how fragile our secret world really was. Through the storm, we found moments of strength. One rainy evening, Malachi looked at me and said, "I won't let them take this away." We sat together watching the city lights, talking about the courage it took to live authentically. The experience pushed my personal growth, teaching me that love required defending it even when the world pushed back. Malachi began researching support groups on campus, a small step toward acceptance that filled me with pride. Yet the pressure mounted as rumors reached his parents, leading to a tense phone call where he dodged questions and hung up shaking. The emotional toll showed in his tired eyes and the way he clung to me at night. We sacrificed small things, skipping parties to avoid stares, but it brought us closer in quiet ways. The crisis forced us to choose each other daily, turning pain into a catalyst for deeper understanding. As the semester wound down, I realized this chapter, though brutal, was shaping us into men who could face anything together, even if the road ahead still looked uncertain. The job offer came at the worst possible time. A dream marketing position in New York, complete with relocation package and starting salary that could change my life. I stared at the email for hours before telling Malachi, watching his face fall as the reality sank in. "New York? That's 3,000 miles away," he said softly, the fear of separation written across his features. We'd built something real here in LA, but the opportunity was too good to ignore. Conversations turned heavy as we weighed options, my excitement clashing with his growing panic. Malachi's identity struggles resurfaced stronger than ever. What if distance makes everything fall apart? My family is already suspicious, and now this. The temporary breakup talk started as a practical discussion but quickly became emotional, both of us sacrificing pieces of our hearts for what we thought was best. I accepted the job with a heavy chest, packing boxes while Malachi helped in silence. The night before my flight, we sat on the empty floor of the apartment, memories flooding back. He cried openly then, admitting his self-doubt had convinced him he wasn't worth holding me back. "I love you enough to let you go if it means you get everything you deserve," he whispered. The sacrifice tore at me, but I boarded the plane the next morning with promises to call every day. In New York, the city buzzed around me, yet every success felt hollow without him. Video calls became our lifeline, filled with stories of my new office and his final semester, but the distance amplified old fears. Malachi faced his family's questions alone, and I battled loneliness in a tiny studio apartment. Weeks turned into months of growth through pain. I realized true love sometimes meant stepping away to let the other person find their strength. Malachi started therapy, confronting the pressures that had shaped him, and slowly he began talking about coming out on his own terms. The separation taught me resilience and the value of honest communication. Late-night conversations revealed how much we'd both changed. My career success balanced by emotional maturity, his quiet confidence blooming without me there to lean on. Yet the ache never faded. One evening he said, "I think I'm ready to tell my parents when you come back for the holidays." The words gave me hope amid the sacrifice. The journey had forced us both to grow individually, proving that even when apart, our bond endured. As Christmas approached, I booked my flight home knowing the reunion would test everything we'd learned. The reunion at LAX felt like coming home to more than just California. Malachi waited at the arrival's gate, his smile brighter than I'd seen in months, and we embraced right there in the crowd without caring who saw. The drive back to our old apartment, now just his place since I'd sublet mine, overflowed with stories and quiet touches. He'd done it, he told me over dinner that night. A long phone call with his parents where he laid everything out, the tears, the questions, the eventual reluctant acceptance. It wasn't perfect, he admitted, but they didn't disown me. That's a start. His courage inspired me, and in that moment I knew every sacrifice had led us here. We spent the holidays rebuilding what distance had tested, walking the same beaches and talking late into the nights about the future. Family pressures still lingered, but Malachi's growth was undeniable. He introduced me to his parents over a video call as his partner, and though awkward, it marked a turning point. My own family welcomed the news with open arms when I finally shared it fully, completing my own journey from fear to freedom. The emotional awakening felt complete as we faced the world together, stronger for every misunderstanding, betrayal, and choice we'd made. Small daily acts like cooking together or planning a cross-country trip solidified the life we wanted. Looking back at the April Fool's confession that started it all, I marveled at how one frozen moment had led to this. Malachi and I had grown from scared young men hiding their truth into partners who chose honesty and love every day. The path included pain, but the resilience we built together proved unbreakable. As we stood on the balcony watching the LA lights one evening, his hand in mine, I felt at peace with the man I'd become and the love we'd fought for. True or false? Coming out to the world is always worth the risk for true love?